Friends and relatives are mourning the 5 people who died on board a submersible taking tourists to the wreck of the Titanic. An implosion is being blamed for the loss of the sub as it descended into the depths of the Atlantic. The US Coast Guard says an underwater robot discovered debris on Thursday after the submersible was last seen on Sunday. Questions are now being raised about safety regulations in the field and why this submersible had not sought certification.
There are regulations in place, but as you can imagine, there aren't that many subs that go that deep, and so the regulations are pretty sparse, and many of them are antiquated or they're designed for specific instances. So it's kind of tricky to navigate those regulatory schemes.
Well, James Cameron directed the Hollywood blockbuster Titanic and has completed 33 dives to the shipwreck. He says this trip should never have been made.
OceanGate shouldn't have been doing what it was doing. I think that's pretty clear. I wish I had been more vocal about that, but I think I was unaware that they weren't certified because I wasn't really studying it. I wasn't really interested. Stockton Rush asked me if I wanted to go out there and dive this season. You know, I wasn't interested. Search, 4 days of search. They're searching everywhere. They were running around with their hair on fire. The sub was right where it was. It was literally on the seafloor below its last known position, which is the first place you look in a search is the last known position. You don't go running around all over the landscape with planes and trains and automobiles searching, right? It was right where it was when it imploded, and I knew that's where they were going to find it. They were on descent. They were at 3,500 feet. They lost comms and tracking, the last one being the critical one, because the transponder that's used to track a sub during descent and on the bottom is a fully autonomous system. It's in its own pressure housing, and it has its own battery power. So for them to lose comms and tracking at the same time, sub was gone.
Well, staying with this, Gabriel, Elizondo is in Boston, where the US Coast Guard was helping with the search. And Gabriel, already there's been a lot of finger-pointing over whether the sub should have launched in the first place.
Yeah, that's right. And the Coast Guard was asked about that, and they said that they're going to be looking into this in the coming days, weeks, and months. They said, we have some of the same questions that others have about the safety standards of this submersible that was really an experimental submersible. It wasn't up to military grade standards by any stretch of the imagination, far from it, quite frankly. But there's certainly some complications as well, because where this Titanic is at and where the Titan was going to explore, that's international waters there. So who sort of would regulate the safety standards in international waters is something that governments, quite frankly, are going to have to start talking to each other about. And, you know, there's some questions about, well, you know, if millionaires and billionaires want to take these extreme risks to explore either outer space or the depths of the ocean, what does it matter? Well, as we saw from this incident, what matters is when something goes wrong, of course, it's up to governments, in this case, England, the US, France, and Canada, to marshal all these resources that are costing tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, in the 5-day search. So certainly a lot of questions, but it's really coming down now to safety standards. And a lot of the people in the exploration community, the wider community, are now looking at each other saying, do there need to be higher safety standards? And also, how are those safety standards implemented?
And as we saw, it was an extensive search. I mean, do we have any more details about how the debris was found?
Well, it ultimately came down to one thing, and in the end, and that was this ROV, or remotely operated vehicle. It's basically a robot that has a capability to go to these depths and then feed back live video to crews on the surface, on a ship on the surface. Again, we've said this over and over, but it can't be repeated enough. The depths of where this occurred are so deep that very few submarines can even get there. There's only a handful of them on the planet that have the capability, these robots, to get to these depths. And so by the time that they were able to mobilize these and get there, that's ultimately what proved decisive, is this getting there to see able to get to those depths, to feed back video, to see the debris. And that's ultimately what was the key here. Of course, they used airplanes, ships on the surface, even sonar buoys to pick up sounds. But bottom line is, what this tragedy taught is that at these extreme depths, you have to have something that can get there to actually see what is on the seafloor at these depths. And ultimately, it was one of these ROVs, remotely operated vehicles, that was the key to finding the debris.
Gabriel, thanks very much for that update.